Rome. If Italy's usually politically dexterous nationalist leader Matteo Salvini failed to anticipate one thing, it was that his political rivals would overcome their mutual animosity to join forces and stop him. But after triggering Tuesday's collapse of the government with his call for early elections that he almost certainly would win, that's exactly what seems to be happening. On Wednesday, the warring enemies of Mr. Salvini, leader of the Anti-Migrant League Party, began the horse trading to form a coalition government that could relegate the man who has been at the center of Italian politics to the sidelines. For Mr. Salvini, the danger now is that he could be out in the cold for 3 years, his momentum stalling and his muscles atrophying until the country is scheduled for its next elections. It's a tremendous mistake, said Gianfranco Pasquino, emeritus professor of political science at the University of Bologna. I think he is already weakened. He knows that he has suffered a blow. But if nothing else, the surrealist crisis, as the Italian news media have dubbed it, has demonstrated once again that anything can happen in Italian politics. Some analysts speculated that Mr. Salvini actually wanted out in order to avoid the difficult budget cutting required in the coming months to avoid an automatic tax hike. Mr. Salvini's exile could infuriate and energize his supporters, and he could grow stronger in the opposition. Nascent alliances could fall apart and lead to early elections. And Mr. Salvini's rivals could even get along. As recently as just a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Salvini's political enemies, his now former coalition partner, the Five Star Movement, and the center-left Democratic Party, were exchanging their usual insults. Five Star has described members of the Democratic Party as mafiosi, corrupt elites, and enablers of child kidnapping. The Democratic Party has described Five Star's members as morons, incompetent conspiracy theorists and fear-mongering internet trolls. But on Wednesday, the center-left Democratic Party unanimously greenlighted negotiations with the Five Star Movement in the hopes of creating a breakthrough government for the legislature. Their aim is avoid snap elections now and to form a coalition that would last for the remaining 3 years of the current legislature, enough time, they hoped, to sap Mr. Salvini's strength. But some members of the Democratic Party also hope that imposing onerous demands on the Five Star Movement as a condition of an alliance will also drain it of support. It has already been cratering. Five Star, which was frequently made to look incompetent and amateurish during its alliance with Mr. Salvini, is desperate to remain in power. Recent polls suggest it could lose half its seats in parliament in new elections. On Wednesday, the Democratic Party released a list of requirements to negotiate with Five Star. They included staying in the European Union, promising to change Italy's lockdown against migrants, and acknowledging, in fact, Italy is a representative democracy. Needless to say, Five Star has been ambivalent about all these things during its 14 months in government with Mr. Salvini. It has a history of threatening to leave the euro, or being purposefully vague about it. Its leaders believe that old-school, brick-and-mortar democracy is past copyright in an era of a direct democracy by the internet, and it has joined Mr. Salvini's hard line against migrants. Nicola Zingaretti, the leader of the Democratic Party, told reporters on Wednesday that negotiations with the Five Star Movement would be carried out in the open and that should an ample parliamentary majority not emerge, the only step would be to go to early elections. In the opinion of Mr. Salvini's multitude of critics in Italy and abroad, that was a nightmare scenario. Better another wobbly, discordant and dysfunctional government than one in which Mr. Salvini exercised what he has called a full power. But if that new alliance seemed plausible on Wednesday, there remained a wild card lurking in Mr. Zingaretti's negotiations with the Five Star leadership. It was the same one that Mr. Salvini apparently underestimated in pushing for new elections, Matteo Renzi. Mr. Renzi, the former prime minister, stepped down as head of the Democratic Party after it was thrashed in elections in 2018. But he still holds great sway in the party because it is his loyalists who sit in the parliament, not those of his successor, Mr. Zingaretti. Mr. Renzi has been perhaps the most adamant opponent of the Five-Star Movement, blaming it for hastening his downfall by spreading misinformation on the web. After the 2018 elections, when Five Star approached the Democratic Party to be its partner, Mr. Renzi vetoed an alliance. But this time, Mr. Renzi, who has waited in the wings for a political comeback, saw an opportunity and supported it. Mr. Salvini was taken aback by Renzi's move, who opening up to Five Stars changed the game, said Lina Palmerini, a political analyst at Sol 24 or Italy's leading financial newspaper. On Wednesday, much of the Italian news media reported on a telephone call between Mr. Zingaretti and Luigi Di Maio, the political leader of the Five Star Movement. Mr. Di Maio asked Mr. Zingaretti for a guarantee that Mr. Renzi, a master infighter and political tactician, would not use his influence to blow up an alliance. Mr. Zingaretti said he could offer no such guarantees. That is because no one really has any idea what Mr. Renzi is plotting. Some analysts believe Mr. Renzi, who has said he would not personally participate in the government, is playing to avoid an election and stall for time long enough to start his own political party. In the meantime, he could attach himself to Five Star, deplete it of political nutrients, and then pull the plug on the government. But that is still a long way off. Italy's president, Sergio Mattarella, who is charged with exploring whether a new government can be formed, will meet on Thursday with the leaders of the Democratic Party, the Five Star Movement and other potential coalition partners, including former Prime Minister Silvio Berlusconi's Forza Italia party. If a consensus is reached, Mr. Mattarella could nominate a prime minister to put together a new government, validated by a confidence vote. In dramatically resigning his position as prime minister on Tuesday, Giuseppe Conte seemed to already be auditioning for the same job in a coalition between Five Star and the Democratic Party. Mr. Conte used his resignation, among the most memorable things he did during his 14 months as prime minister, to lay into Mr. Salvini, whose anti-migrant decrees he had signed and whose anti-European Union salvos he had tolerated. He called Mr. Salvini a highly irresponsible and a severely reckless and a clumsy. He said Mr. Salvini was a breathlessly chasing support on social media and a following his personal interests and those of his own party at the expense of national interests. He chastised his use of Catholic symbols on the campaign trail and called him an opportunist. But Mr. Conte, who is closely associated with Five Star, also ended his speech by thanking the opposition, to which the Democratic Party belongs. He said he was looking toward the future and would love to work on issues that just happened to be central to the Democratic Party, such as education and the environment. But there is strong resistance within the Democratic Party to Mr. Conte's return, and any appearance of continuity with the previous government. While the search for a prime minister is wide open, it is clear who just about everyone wants to keep away from power. Ita's government against the League and against the future, Mr. Salvini said in front of Parliament on Wednesday afternoon. He challenged his opponents to stop running away and to face him in elections in October. Elections. Elections, he said. Ita's up to the Italians to decide.